What's up, y'all? Shuffle. Welcome to the guide for Sahar, the Duelist, the brand new hero that came out with the Darkest Dungeon 2 DLC. And let me tell you up front, this is a very complex character. It's going to be no surprise if anyone struggles with her because there is a lot going on. The moves change a lot during any of her paths. The stance effects change. There's just so much going on. And so I feel like we need to talk about it and help everyone learn how to play this character a bit better. As we start off the video, I want to give a shout out to one of our recent members, that is Marwan. Thank you so much for joining the membership YouTube thingamajig. Very appreciative, and it really does help sustain the channel, so thank you so much. And if you want to be a member yourself or check out any of the other links in the description box, feel free to scroll down and do so. Of course, since it's a guide, we're going to talk about strengths. What is Sahar good at? She's incredibly mobile. This character can have something to do in rank 1, rank 4, rank 3, rank 2. She can just go anywhere and do stuff as long as you have a couple of the right skills equipped at any time. So this character is never out of position. Her next major strength is that she has very good, consistent damage. Since she is a fencer, she's supposed to be accurate, nimble, and all of that, so all of her damage ranges are very tight, whereas other characters will be like 4 to 8. She'll be 5 to 7. She has a couple different ways to do really good damage, especially with Fleisch, which we'll talk about in the skills section. Or if you just want to keep up the constant pressure, you can just do whatever moves, give her a ton of riposte, and just loop those endlessly, which is kind of our final strength. She has riposte. She has the best riposte in the game, I would say. It's not even close. It's not just flat damage. It usually does something else, either through her path or her trinket selection. For weaknesses with Sahar, the first one, probably the one everyone's going to see right away, and that is she is literally made of tissue paper. This is a quintessential glass cannon in this video game, and compared to Grave Robber, who seems like a pretty close comparison in some cases, Grave Robber has a couple different ways to heal herself, and she can get into stealth very easily if she needs to. Sahar only really has dodge as something to protect her, and even then, if you want to make the most out of her riposte, you want her to be getting targeted, so it's kind of dangerous. She gets hit a couple times, doesn't get her dodges to go off properly, and she can be a death store, so you have to be very careful. The next weakness is this is a very mastery hungry character. She does okay just, at base power level, anyone does, but this character really excels once she gets a couple mastery points, especially through some of her more specialized path skills. Her final weakness we're talking about is that she is very vulnerable to status effects. Damage over time effects can easily snipe her since she has very low HP, and dots scale up very fast in this game. If she gets dazed or stunned, it can really disrupt the skills that she's trying to use back to back, so you don't get your combos going across the entire fight. And she can literally go down to something as simple as she taunted, someone hit her through dodge, she got stunned, she got hit really hard right after that, and then she's probably dead. Next, we'll talk about how to play this character. Duelist is really fun, really complex, has a lot of moving parts, and there are a couple ways to play her easily that I'll tell you about, but the general guideline that you're trying to do is, first of all, you need to know what skill pathways, skill loops that you're trying to do. Her ability slots are very competitive, and if you want to make sure you don't have a missing tool if something happens, then you really need to be aware of the main skills you're trying to use, and then what you can use if those fail. An example would be if you want to use Fleisch, she has to go into aggressive stance to get the bonus damage, and then it puts her up to rank 1, and then after that, so this is the start of turn 3, you have to either find a way to move her back with someone if you want to use Fleisch again, or if you want to set up some defense, disengage and stuff, you have to plan that out ahead of time. To help you make more sense of the point I just stated with the skill looping is you should define her role when you pick her. Obviously, everyone has kind of a defined role, but with Sahar, since so many of her buttons mostly do damage or a little bit of utility or swap her stances, you need to decide on which ones you need the most. So if you're going to go damage, you pick your damage skill. Do you want to use Fleisch? Okay, you have to find a way into aggressive stance, and then out of rank 1, for instance, as I said in the other example. It is very easy to misplay this character and end up in the back or end up in the front, and then you can't use one of the other skills that you were planning to use the turn before. And the other is the stance swapping. So if you want to use a certain skill and you're in the right rank, you have to make sure you're in the right stance. So making sure you know what you're trying to do, what tools you need to accomplish that is paramount to succeeding with this character. The final way to play Sahar is to make sure that the team can adjust to her. She's not a plug and play character. Grave Robber, since she really has like one or two things she's trying to do, for instance, it's just an easy comparison where if you want to use lunge, then use lunge and then shadow fade right after. It's very 1-2, 1-2 AB binary type of stuff. The team has to be very accommodating for her. So you want to make sure that, for instance, if you're going to run one of her paths that we'll talk about where she's kind of a support hero, you want to make sure that she's not disrupting the support target with being out of position or knocking them out of position while trying to buff them. All right, buckle up. We're in the skills section now. This is this is the big one. So as a Wanderer character, she is... I can't even say straightforward. Like this hero is so complex, but it's really fun. If you really like to get into the mechanics and stuff, I think you'll have a lot of fun. And the first is Touche. This is her stock attack. It's actually crazy. She can use this from any spot, and it hits the front too, but that's still pretty good to have a consistent move. This is like where if you put on the wrong skills or you severely messed up and you're not sure what to do, you can just spam Touche or something like that and still do things. And this only gets changed on, I believe, one of her paths, and otherwise it's just a regular hit. Like if you don't want to go into a stance, you can just spam Touche, for instance. It's okay if it doesn't have one. Unless it's mastered, then you get a stance, so pick and choose. Next is Feint. This is a really cool one. I'm surprised it does damage. Like, since it can do damage, it can get rid of enemy defensive tokens, and inverting your stance with one button without having to move and use something else like disengage, meditation that we'll talk about. It's really nice to just have one button that can do this. It doesn't matter if it only hits the first two. So being able to flip your stance on a whim and get 2 riposte or 3 is pretty sick. So this is one that I usually have a spot for it in most builds. Then we have disengage. This one gets changed also, and we'll see it later, but this is a really cool move. It does some solid on-hit damage, and this puts her in defensive stance immediately. This is the first way she has into a stance that's not upgraded Touche. So, and that's the other thing too with Feint. If you just want repose tokens, you can just spam that, but it's not as fun. But with disengage, it puts her into defensive stance. That's why it's got the shield and the sword, and she gets dodge. But what's really cool about this too is it ignores riposte. Riposte isn't super common on enemies, but something like Knight, being able to get through riposte and remove it when you hit him is pretty awesome, if I may say. And when this is upgraded, it gives her dodge plus, so that's really nice. And it moves her back, so it's got a lot of utility. And then the other parts of this for the Wanderer path is it pulls and pushes, which is okay. It's not the primary purpose, especially the pull, because you can't hit rank 4. So it's like if you want to pull a fishmonger up front or something, or an altar, a herald that's sitting in rank 4, you can't do it. So it's better to push things, but if you're going to push things, use the boots. Flick, I feel like, is a pretty odd skill. It does solid damage, it's got good crits, and it's stance dependent. So if she's in defensive stance, it removes dodge. If she's in offensive stance, it pierces block. And these are difficult to set up. It's something you have to really think about ahead of time. You know, if you're in the sprawl, enemies like to dodge a lot. If you're in the tangle, they like to block a lot, so you have to have a way to deal with it. So get into your stance immediately. And I really don't like this move too much because the rank restrictions are kind of harsh, and when it's upgraded, it gets execution. But base form, I don't usually touch this. Upgraded, it's okay, but you have coup de grace, which is also your execute. Next is preparation. This is the take aim of Duelist. This is crazy. This move is crazy, dude. It does the same. It does the same stuff that take aim was really busted about. It doesn't even matter the riposte damage. That's almost a trap. No, I'm not I'm not serious about that. But the riposte damage is good for 4 turns, especially because that's an entire regular fight in most cases, and a good chunk, like half a boss fight. And when you use it normally, you get speed and strength, pretty cool, and go into aggressive stance, and you start with this move, which is really nice. When you're in aggressive stance and you use preparation, you get crits. You get 1 crit, 1 strength, 1 speed. You actually get the blood combat item on a button. Instead of having to go to a rare node or use a pet, you get it for freaking free, dude. This might get nerfed. Don't be surprised if this gets nerfed later on. And this is outdated, but it's really good. And there are a couple ways to mess with this. You know, like if you want to open with disengage and move back and then like flip stance or something like that, there's the middle step. So you disengage, feint, flip stance, prep, and then like flash, right? Takes 3 turns to get there, but that's the kind of stuff you're looking at. Like this is okay for a boss. And you know, you go into the aggressive stance, you're getting ready to flash, you have 7 to 10 damage that has 30% boosted damage, and you have strength and a guaranteed crit, and you go first next turn. So you can see how if you put the pieces together, it's like chain links. If you put them together, this character pops off. Next is the boot. This is probably going to be a fan favorite. This is just a funny move, and it gets 10 crit for mastery. I don't know if that's a typo or what, man. That's a lot. And baseline, whatever, 2 to 5. Knockback 2 is pretty good. So if you hit 2 all the way to 4, some enemies really struggle on that one. You have to be in aggressive stance. That's the only thing that kind of holds it back. But what's also nice is when it's upgraded, it gives combo. The only reason this isn't super good as Wanderer is because a lot of the things that you combo, you know, and you want to stun or whatever, if you knock them into rank 3, you almost can't do it. Like, you can use pistol shot, but you don't get stunning blow, you don't get rampart, hold the line, stuff like that, because they're in rank 3, or rank 4, I should say. So, I mean, there's still ways to make this work. You know, if it's a size 2 and it's the only thing left, or whatever, then you can do stuff like that, but it's kind of niche. Next is again, and that's the name of the move, you can use it from anywhere and target any of your allies. And baseline, it removes your stance token and then clears someone else's cooldowns. It's an interesting, really cool idea for a move, but think about how often you're using Ethereal Dust. That's the combat item that is reminiscent of the Shard Dust from DD1, where it refreshes your cooldowns. There aren't a lot of characters that have cooldowns big enough to warrant you dumping your stance to remove their cooldowns, you know? Like Vestal, Seraph Vestal is probably the best target for this, but it's not even worth it. I'm sure people are going to find a really cheesy thing to do with this. I haven't found it yet, so if you do, let me know, but otherwise, it's okay. There's a path that makes this really good. And we have Flash. This is like a bread and butter damage move. This is... it doesn't have the strength and damage output of like a Howling End or like a Big Chop or something, but it's good. This is kind of the end goal of any string of abilities you're trying to do that end in aggressive. So if you go into one stance, like defensive stance, flip it, go into prep, get all the bonuses, or just start with prep. Turn 1 prep and then turn 2 flash and be done. And if you have someone that can immobilize themselves up front, like Man-at-Arms, Leper, Hellion, for instance, then you can just spam this because you don't go all the way into rank 1. And that's kind of good too. So this is really something that if you're not trying to do something specific, you're going to be using this in most cases. And this comes from one of our shrines, so it's going to be a while. Next is meditation. This is kind of the other side of preparation, where you start in defensive stance and you get a lot of dodge. And so if you're in defensive stance and you use it again, then you get taunt. If you are in aggressive stance, when you use it, you get riposte. And the upgraded version is just a little bit more powerful. You get 3 dodge plus. That's actually very powerful instead of regular dodge. And then it removes combo, which ideally, if you're dodge tanking something like Exemplar, you're trying to dodge the combo anyway, but still disrupting Exemplar is fine. So this, if you want to do a lot of stance flipping or not use feint, for instance, then you're going to run this. And if you don't want to get the taunt, but still get the riposte, you can easily do that. And we have coup de grace. This move is really interesting. It changes on, I think, all 3 of her paths. It can be used anywhere to hit anything. It's Omni Reach. And she has to be in defensive stance, though. So it's kind of, it's a little bit difficult. You can't, like, hit a huge flash off of aggressive stance and then coup de grace after. But this thing, it ignores block and weaken. That's pretty sick. And it has execute 1 baseline. But when it's upgraded, it has execute 2. And I don't know if people heard me talk about this before, but execute 1's pretty nice. But things that die to execute 1 usually aren't that difficult to get rid of. Like, you hit them to death's door, and they have, you know, a damage over time effect, and then they die. That's fine. Execute 2 gets through a lot of stuff. This gets through some of the big cultist enemies. This gets through lair bosses. It is really good to have execute 2, and it's on a move that doesn't hit mega hard, but it is consistent, and that can be really nice. So, you need something to make sure you can pick off targets. Coup de grace is probably going to be in most builds. Then finally we have Ruthless Instruction. This is a cool move. It's not like a powerhouse type of thing. You have to be in a stance, obviously. When you're in defensive stance, you give someone else dodge. Or if you're in aggressive stance, they ignore blind. For 3 turns, that's not the easiest thing to thread the needle on for value, but it's cool. You know, if you're expecting to get blinded a lot, like the Shroud, maybe pop it on. If you have a tank that might be in danger and you have this equipped, you might be able to save them with some dodge. And now we come to the paths, dude. Like, this is loaded. Alright. So this is a backline version of the character, essentially. And what changes are disengage. And again becomes a way different move, and I really like it. Coup de grace changes on everything, as I said, and then Ruthless Instruction. So with disengage, you flip your stance without needing feint, and it doesn't give you defensive stance. And it gives you dodge and back too. So if you need to like really move away and get, this is like a true disengage. You know, it's not something with a little utility, move 1 space. You like GTFO out of there, you know. And you get some dodge for it, which is okay, but it still ignores riposte, which is very nice. Then we come to, again, this on Instructrice is super good, man. Like, the aggressive version is the better one, but I mean, I can't even say that. Like, okay, so baseline, giving someone percentage damage per stress point for 4 turns is nuts, because some of the boss fights in this game put out a ton of stress, so you can just on demand give an ally like plus 40, 50, 70% damage. Massive. And then if you're in defensive stance, they get an extra turn. It's not extra round or extra action, which we're used to with like Encore, you know. This is an extra turn, so it works differently. You get like your dot ticks, skill cooldowns and stuff, and it's just nuts. Any way to give someone an extra turn in this game is just insane. But it is a bit heavier to pull off compared to Encore, which is just, you know, you kind of slow Jester down a bit. You give the person 3 extra stress. So this is definitely something to be used sparingly, but it can make some big plays. And then we have, we'll do Instruction, and we'll just save Coup de grace for last. This is an interesting one because now she becomes a stress healer. So if she's in the back and she's in defensive stance, she can heal 2 or 3 stress off of your friends. And then if she's in aggressive stance, she can give them strength or crit. So this is, again, really, really interesting. So someone like Leper really takes advantage of this character because you can, like, since Leper can manage his own stress pretty well, you can get the huge damage buff out of, you know, again, and then give him a crit token too. Since both of these are aggressive stance, you can just go again and then hit, what is it, Ruthless Instruction, and now suddenly he has bonus damage and a crit token. So it's pretty crazy. And for everyone else, there's a really nice stress heal, a 3-point stress heal on a 1-turn cooldown. good. We have coup de grace, which on this path changes a bit. It doesn't have the same tight like 4-4, 6-6 damage range, but I believe it's got a little more crit than the Wanderer version. Let me take a look. Yeah, it does. It's got a lot more. And then the cooldown is it shorter? Like, you see what I'm saying? There's so much going on here. No, it's the same cooldown. But you get execute 1, but it's a little more damage and a lot of crits. And then if you kill someone on the mastered version, your skill cooldown's clear. A little bit tough to pull off again. Like, you know, if you use again and then coup de grace and you actually get the kill, then you can use it again. So that can be interesting. But mainly this is just a damage tool for her to use from the back ranks. Like 5 to 8 damage with 20 crit is pretty solid. So that's just one of the paths. We have antagoniste or antagoniste. I can't even say it. My French is bad, dude. So what changes on this is touche, disengage, debout, coup de grace. So much like how Confessor Vestal goes like the debuff path, Sahar with this path goes kind of debuff focus, but it's more just utility stuff as well. And so Touche loses some backline reach, like she can't use it out of 4, but she can hit 3 now. And the damage drops off quite a bit, you know, 5 to 7, 4 to 5, that's not really a ton. But depending on what stance you're in, you can give them weaken or vuln. Not super amazing, but you know, if you just sit in one of her stances, and because she doesn't move anymore, so if you sit in one of her stances and just keep swinging, you know, you can throw out weaken every turn, like 5 to 7 plus vuln on a target, and then you hit them again with vuln and give them vuln again. That's actually kind of good, you know. So there's some really interesting stuff. Or if you want to pull off some other combos, like, you know, you find yourself in aggressive stance, you touche, give them vuln, prep, and then flash next turn. You know, again, extra couple turns to get there, but you can still do like touche and deflash if you really wanted to. So a lot of cool stuff to do with this one. Disengage changes quite a bit. She still moves back, she still gets dodged, thankfully, and it does put her into defensive this time. Initially, if she's in defensive stance, it doesn't do anything, if I see this correctly. And so if she's in aggressive, she combos them, and that's kind of interesting. So the sad part is you can't do it every turn. Like, she can't just go into aggressive stance and then just disengage over and over, because it flips her stance. But if you want to do it every other turn, you can. And when it's upgraded, so this is what I was talking about, her really wanting mastery, because a lot of her extra stuff comes in when she has mastery. If you're in defensive stance and they're comboed, you blind them twice. Decent use of a combo token, and you get some damage, and you still ignore riposte. And then we have the boot, which this is kind of the boot glow up path. So normally it was just, you know, hefty knockback. Now it's still a knockback, but you can stun them if they have combo for both of them. And when you are in aggressive stance, you can combo them after, but it's not knockback 3. So it's a little bit easier to pull off with your teammates, but another stun, and that makes it kind of cool, you know, because with the new characters coming in, their ability to stun and combo and stuff like that is a bit higher. So I think stuns are slowly going to be a little more attainable for the player. So that might be interesting. But otherwise, just solid move. Mostly still trying to send a frontliner to the back and disrupt them. We have coup de grace on this path. Does not do a lot of damage. It's more of a utility thing. But what's interesting is if you're in a stance, well, starting off with aggressive, you can double weak, double vuln the target and lose your stance. That's crazy. Like, that is super crazy to have. Like, really good if you're focus firing, or if you're like against a Docker that's going to hit really hard. And then you upgrade this, and it gains defensive stance stun. We are entering the world. This might be power creep. We are entering the world of no setup stun on someone that is not bounty hunter. That's kind of good. That's kind of good. So if you really want to get all of the disruptive utility, you know, you have knockbacks, you have vuln weak on a couple different skills. You have the ability to blind on combo. I'd say disengage is probably the weakest out of the changed versions of these. And then you get a stun. We'll see how disruptive that is, or how dangerous that is for the player. Then finally, we have Intrepide. I'm assuming, or Intrepida. But yeah, so a lot of talking, man. So we have Feint, Disengage, Prep, and Coup de Grace again. And so with Feint, this is probably the weakest version of Feint, because I don't think she gets riposte from... She can get riposte from Meditation, okay. But otherwise, riposte is really hard to come by since Feint doesn't generate it. It just gives you dodge, but that's still kind of nice. You know, 2 dodge plus, not a bad turn. And Disengage is interesting because if you're in defensive stance, it's Shadow Fade. Kind of power creeping Audrey, dude. And if you're in aggressive stance, it forces the person behind her when she goes and uses it to guard them. So she can make anyone else in the game now guard. And since she can't really get riposte easily herself in this path, if you have riposte on someone else, like Man-at-Arms, Highwayman, you can disengage behind them. Phone went off, but you can disengage behind them and give them the ability to guard her and then fire off their riposte as well. We have Preparation. This is probably the weakest change for Preparation. Like, it, you still get all the wacky damage bonuses baseline, and then when it's upgraded, it cleanses dots, which is, it's nice, but like, are you going to be in defensive stance at the right time and you have enough damage over time ticking through you that it's worth cleansing? Probably not. I mean, it'll probably save someone, but really this is still just the damage button. And then we have Coup de Grace that changes again, and I forgot to talk about her stance effects per path. So when she's in the... Let me talk about the skill first. So, it doesn't seem like it does anything, it just removes the stance effects, but actually the effects that she has for being in her aggressive or defensive stance is a bit dangerous for this path. So for, I gotta look it up because I have it off the side here, but in this one, I believe she gets, yeah, okay. So in Intrepide, she gets bonus damage when someone misses her, so she gets plus 20% bonus damage, but then she also gets 40% damage received as a debuff, so yeah, a little bit of damage, but she can literally get one-tapped in some cases after that. Bit dangerous. And then that's for the defensive stance, and then for her aggressive stance, she gets bonus crit, 5% extra crit when you miss her, but then her dot res goes down. Bit easier to manage that one. You know, a little bit of crit isn't a huge thing, but then at the same time, you know, little dot res doesn't matter too much. She's like 40 across the board. Are you kidding me? Oh, the altar. But still, that's a lot, dude. God. Character's power creep. I'm gonna say it. Watch the consensus be she's not that good later on. Once people learn it, but I don't know. I gotta find out the other ones just so I'm thorough here. And for her Wanderer path, I think you guys saw it if you watched the stream, she gets a chance to heal when she riposts in aggressive stance. I think it's 10% HP for 33% chance to get it on riposte in aggressive. And then when she's in defensive stance, she has a chance to get dodge. I think it's 20%. And in her first path, the instructor path, for defensive stance, if she kills something, she loses 1 stress. Pretty nice. And for aggressive, she gets healing. I think it's regen 3 for killing something, which is kind of nuts. In defensive stance with this path, and she hits a combo target, she lowers their debuff resistance for 3 turns. It's only 10%. It's not a huge deal. But, you know, that's any combo effect, which is okay. Then she has debuffs in that path. And then the other one, probably a bit easier to pull off. If she's in aggressive stance, her effects gain 20% debuff res piercing. So the combo effect is good for the team, but really you're not running a ton of debuffs at any one time. So probably want the aggressive version. So if she's in aggressive, then these weakens and vulns and not stun, because that's a different resist, that's the stun resist, but they have a better chance of sticking. And we talked about the third path, right? Yeah, okay. So, those are paths. Got him. Whew. This is work, man. Then we'll talk about trinkets, and then we'll talk about teammates, and then we'll end the video. Now it's time to talk about Duelist trinkets, and thankfully they're not as overly complex as the character. They're very straightforward. And the first one is the Academy ring. Maybe there's some French pronunciation on that, but, you know, I'm ignorant, so I just use what's in front of me. But, yeah, so what's good about this is 10% crit on riposte is actually really nice because there are certain ways, like if you just spam feint, for instance, that she can just keep flipping whatever her stance is, but then keep getting riposte every turn, especially if it's upgraded. So this is like 10% crit on something that can potentially go off like 3 times a turn. That's really good in terms of the return value. The movement piercing is nice. There are only a few things that you want to really move in this game. You know, there's like one of the lair bosses and a couple different enemies, but pushing stuff away from you is usually not super necessary, nor is pulling stuff, but it's there. You know, it's definitely not the focal point. And then finally, the gain on miss, remove dodge. So this may not seem like much at first, but this is important because every time you're riposting, you know, you're swinging into the enemy and they may have dodge, you may have blind. And so you can miss and then remove your dodge, which is your defense, while you're doing riposte. So it's not exactly just like pure upsides. You have to be a little aware and careful. Like if you start seeing that she's just getting hit like 3 times in a row, just stop riposting. Do something else. Next is the Dark Lanthorn or Lanthorn, I don't know. And the next 2 trinkets, they both give her a stance at the start of combat. And this could be all it is. Because that right there is nice enough. This essentially saves Sahar her first turn in combat. She doesn't have to do something like a touche in a certain rank or preparation, meditation, stuff like that. She just starts and you're, you know, at full volume. And then much like the previous trinket, the ring, this has a kind of an interesting thing with riposte where it's more of a debuff, debilitating riposte instead of just raw damage output. Also, by the way, I just remember this is a Dark Souls reference. So there you go. If you know, you know. But yeah, and so you get the riposte skills with the ability to blind the enemy, but then also you have this other detriment. You know, the ring makes it so if you miss, you end up losing your dodge. This is if you get hit, you have a chance to burn yourself. One burn's not a huge deal, but you have to remember she has like 28 life. So getting hit and having 1 burn, she could get, you know, hit twice with something big like Hullbreaker and then be on death's door and just die to a stupid little 1-point burn. So you gotta be careful and make sure you have a plan. Like if she starts getting hit with riposte, you know, it's okay to just taunt or guard her and just get, you know, all the attention off her. You don't really lose too much riposte value because your character survives. Then finally, this is, I think it might be my favorite of the bunch, and that's just because I love flesh or fleisha or whatever it is, and it's Lover's Glove. So you start in the aggressive stance. Again, much like the previous one, the Lantern, just starting in a stance, amazing, you know, very good. And if you want to give your allies a speed boost with, again, that can be pretty useful. Like if you want to make sure, kind of like old take game, if you want to make sure that when they get their buffs and stuff that they are able to go before anything else happens next round. And then if you miss, you have a chance of getting 1 stress. That's actually pretty hefty. It's probably the biggest downside out of these. It's hard to say, but I mean, it does matter. Like you could just miss, get unlucky like 3 times, and then you hit a meltdown. That's not cool. For teammates, the sky is literally the limit for Sahar just because she can do so many different things if you tool her to do it. But if you just want the easiest way to do stuff with her and her teammates, the first thing I would suggest is possibly having other dancers, someone like Jester, Highwayman, Crusader, Grave Robber, those types of characters, because it helps them when she moves around because they can get their other skills more frequently, like Holy Lance or Lunge, for instance. And it also keeps her in position so she doesn't have to waste turns using Disengage if you don't want to. Another teammate that's really good for her is one of the tanks, or that's not Crusader, even though Crusader can immobilize. But you have Man-at-Arms, Leper, and Hellion. They can anchor themselves in rank 1, which is really good if you want to go into aggressive stance and spam Fleisch. So if you set it up, you're fighting a boss or whatever, and you want to keep dumping buffs under her, then she can keep spamming it for a few turns, and that's really good. The final pick might be a bit of a twist because Vestal as a character is kind of falling in stock with a lot of players, but Vestal is a solid teammate for her because you can use the consecrations to give her a lot of defenses or offense tokens. And Vestal is really good about clearing stuns and damage over time with ministrations, so she can do a pretty good job keeping her safe. Plus, Vestal has a guard if things get really crazy. Alright, y'all, that's going to do it for the video. Thanks for watching. Let me know what you're thinking down below in the comments. Let me know, or let everyone else know, what you've been doing with Sahar that is getting a lot of success, because even though we just got her and she has a lot to do, I feel like we're going to be discovering a lot of things and combos with her for a while. Very high skill cap character. So yeah, as always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.